Marcus Chen pressed his face against the cold viewport of the passenger transport, watching the massive Galactic Council station grow larger against the star-filled backdrop. The structure was breathtaking, a crystalline metropolis floating in space, with spires that twisted impossibly through dimensions his human eyes could barely comprehend. Ships of every conceivable design docked at its numerous ports, representing the 57 species that made up the Galactic Council. He adjusted his worn leather jacket and checked his credentials one more time. The holographic display showed his assignment: Junior Cultural Liaison, Earth Representative Office. The lowest possible ranking for a council employee, barely above janitorial staff. Marcus had graduated top of his class from the Seoul Academy of Interstellar Relations, spoke 17 alien languages fluently, and had written 3 doctoral dissertations on xenosociology. None of that seemed to matter to the council's assignment board. The transport shuddered as it docked. Marcus gathered his single travel bag, everything he owned in the galaxy, and joined the queue of disembarking passengers. Around him, beings of incredible diversity chatted in musical languages that made his universal translator work overtime. There were the tall, graceful Etherians, with their translucent blue skin, the insectoid Zephirites clicking their mandibles in complex rhythms, and the massive, rock-like Gravitans whose every step made the deck plates vibrate. None of them paid Marcus any attention. To them, he was just another primitive from a newly contacted world, barely worthy of acknowledgement. The docking bay was a cathedral of activity. Cargo loaders, some mechanical, some biological, moved goods between ships, while officials in elaborate ceremonial robes processed arrivals. Marcus followed the signs to the Personnel Assignment Center, his footsteps echoing oddly in the artificial gravity field. The assignment clerk was a Syrian, one of the energy-based species that existed as controlled plasma within specialized containment suits. Her voice came through speakers as harmonious tones. Marcus Chen, designation 7749 Gamma Sol, she announced without looking up from her data screens. Reporting for cultural liaison duties. That's correct, Marcus replied, offering his warmest smile. I'm excited to contribute to the Council's mission of Sub-Basement 7, Section J14, the clerk interrupted. Your supervisor will brief you on waste management protocols for the human section. Marcus blinked. Waste management? I think there's been a mistake. I'm assigned as a cultural liaison. I have degrees in all new species begin with basic facility maintenance, the clerk said, her tone suggesting this conversation was already over. Earth has been a council member for exactly 47 standard days. Your species has no established diplomatic track record. Assignment confirmed. The energy being gestured dismissively toward a corridor marked with symbols Marcus couldn't read. His translator helpfully informed him they meant lower levels, service personnel only. Marcus swallowed his pride and nodded. Understood. How long until I can apply for advancement? Typical probationary period for primitive species is 50 standard years. The clerk replied matter-of-factly. Assuming satisfactory performance and cultural adaptation, 50 years. Marcus was 28. He'd be nearly 80 by the time they considered him for anything resembling actual diplomatic work. The journey to Sub-Basement 7 took him through a maze of corridors that grew progressively less magnificent the lower he went. Gone were the crystal walls and flowing architectural curves. Here, the walls were plain metal, the lighting harsh and utilitarian. The other beings he passed wore maintenance coveralls rather than ceremonial robes. Section J14 turned out to be a cramped office space carved out of what had probably once been a storage closet. Inside, Marcus found a desk, a basic computer terminal, and a Norfelian supervisor named Grex who looked like a cross between an octopus and a filing cabinet. You're the human, Grex stated, his tentacles manipulating 3 different data tablets simultaneously. Can you read Basic Galactic? Grex. Yes, I'm fluent in. Good. Your job is to monitor waste disposal efficiency in the human quarters. Humans produce 23% more organic waste than the galactic average. This is causing processing delays. Your species needs to adapt its consumption habits to council standards. Marcus stared at the stack of forms Grex placed in front of him. After years of studying interstellar diplomacy, His job was literally monitoring garbage. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "I was wondering if there might be opportunities to assist with actual cultural exchange programs. I have extensive training in—" Grex's eye stalks swiveled toward him with what Marcus had learned was the Norfelian equivalent of an annoyed glare. "Human Chen, your species has been in space for barely 200 standard years. The youngest council member before Earth was the Ziltani Collective, who had been spacefaring for 12,000 years when they were admitted. Do you understand the magnitude of that difference? I do, but your people still wage wars over territorial disputes. You haven't developed beyond chemical propulsion for atmospheric flight. Half your planet's population still believes in supernatural deities." Grex's tentacles slapped the desk for emphasis. The Council accepted Earth membership as an experiment in rapid development assistance. That doesn't mean humans are ready for positions of actual responsibility. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks but kept his voice level. "With respect, sir. Dismissing an entire species based on technological development seems counterproductive to the Council's stated mission of unity through diversity." Grex made a sound like air escaping from a punctured balloon, which Marcus's translator identified as Norfelian laughter. "Unity through diversity," Grex repeated mockingly. "That's a very human interpretation. The reality is unity through conformity to established Council protocols. Your job, Human Chen, is to help your species conform." The next few weeks fell into a mind-numbing routine. Marcus reviewed waste disposal reports, filed efficiency assessments, and attended mandatory orientation sessions that seemed designed more to emphasize human inadequacy than provide useful information. He shared cramped quarters in the human section with 6 other Earth representatives, all of whom had been assigned similarly menial tasks. There was Sarah Kim, a former NASA engineer now responsible for monitoring air quality sensors; David Torres, who had been the UN's top expert on extraterrestrial law, was assigned to inventory cleaning supplies; Dr. Amara Okafor, who held 3 degrees in xenobiology, spent her days cataloging lunch menu preferences. "They're not even trying to use our expertise," Sarah complained over dinner in the human section's tiny communal area. The food was nutritionally adequate but flavorless, designed to meet the needs of all 57 member species, which meant it satisfied none of them particularly well. "Maybe that's the point," David suggested grimly. "Keep us busy with busy work until we either adapt to their way of thinking or give up and go home." Marcus pushed the gray protein paste around his plate. "The Chinese had a saying, 'The tall tree catches the wind.' Maybe we're supposed to keep our heads down until they trust us more." "How long are we supposed to wait?" Dr. Okafor asked. "Some of us have families back home. Careers we put on hold for this opportunity." Before Marcus could answer, an announcement echoed through the station's communication system. The voice belonged to High Counselor Threnix, the ancient Etherian who led the Council's ruling body. "Attention all station personnel. We have received disturbing reports from the Kepler 442 system. The research station on Kepler 442b has gone silent. All attempts at communication have failed. A joint task force is being assembled to investigate. Department heads should submit personnel recommendations immediately." The humans looked at each other. A research station going silent in deep space, that was exactly the kind of crisis where Earth's expertise might actually be valuable. Human space agencies had dealt with countless emergency scenarios. They had protocols for communication failures, experience with hostile environments, and a talent for improvisation that came from constantly operating at the edge of their technological capabilities. "We should volunteer," Marcus said immediately. Sarah shook her head. "They won't even consider us. We're waste management and inventory control." "Then we make them consider us," Marcus replied, standing up. "What's the worst they can do? Assign us to even more menial jobs?" Dr. Okafor laughed bitterly. "You want to volunteer for a potentially dangerous mission into unknown space?" "Marcus, they think we're barely evolved primates." "Exactly," Marcus said, his mind racing with possibilities. "They have low expectations. That means they'll underestimate what we're capable of, and sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have." The next morning, Marcus stood outside the office of Director Cavalex. the Zephyrite administrator responsible for station personnel assignments. The insectoid being was known for his rigid adherence to protocol and his particular disdain for chaotic species like humans. Marcus's request for a meeting had been denied 3 times through official channels, so he'd simply shown up and refused to leave until Kvalex agreed to see him. When the director finally emerged from his office, his mandibles clicked in obvious irritation. "Human Chen, you are disrupting official station business. Return to your assigned duties immediately." "Director Kvalex," Marcus said formally, offering the appropriate Zephyrite greeting gesture, a complex movement involving both hands that took him months to master. "I request consideration for inclusion in the Kepler 442 investigation task force." Kvalex's compound eyes focused on Marcus with what seemed like genuine surprise. "You request what?" "Kvalex's. My species has extensive experience with communication failures and emergency scenarios in hostile environments. We've successfully recovered personnel from failed missions in our own system multiple times. I believe human expertise could be valuable to this operation." For a long moment, Kvalex simply stared at him. Then the mandible clicking resumed this time. Marcus realized it was Zephyrite laughter. "Human Chen, the Kepler 442 investigation will be led by the Council's most experienced deep space specialists. The team will include advanced Etherian psychics, Graviton heavy engineering specialists, and Syrian energy form reconnaissance experts. You are suggesting that a species that hasn't even achieved faster than light travel on their own should be included in such a mission? I'm suggesting that diversity of perspective improves problem-solving efficiency," Marcus replied calmly. "Human approaches to crisis management might reveal solutions that established protocols miss." Kvalex leaned closer, his insectoid features intimidating despite Marcus's attempts to remain calm. "Human, your species' approach to crisis management involves launching explosive devices at problems and hoping for favorable outcomes. The last time humans attempted a complex space rescue, didn't half your crew perish in what you called acceptable losses?" Marcus felt a spike of anger but forced himself to remain diplomatic. Kvalex was referring to the Apollo 13 mission, which humans considered one of their greatest triumphs of improvisation and teamwork. The fact that the Council saw it as evidence of human recklessness revealed everything about their fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. "Director, with respect, you're describing human adaptability and resourcefulness under pressure as weaknesses. Those traits have allowed my species to survive and thrive in environments that would challenge many Council members. Your species has survived, Human Chen, because you breed rapidly enough to compensate for your high mortality rates." Kvalex replied coldly. "That is not the same as competence." Marcus took a deep breath. This was it, the moment where he either accepted his place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy or fought for something better. "Director Kvalex, I formally request that you include my assessment in your personnel recommendations. If the Council decides human perspectives aren't valuable, that's their decision to make. But I won't accept that decision being made without them having all the information." Kvalex's mandibles stopped clicking. For the first time in their conversation, he seemed to actually consider Marcus as something other than an annoyance. "You realize, Human Chen, that inclusion in this mission would likely result in your death? The Kepler 442 system is beyond Council territory. Whatever happened to that research station, it was significant enough to overcome their advanced defensive systems and trained personnel." "I understand the risks," Marcus replied steadily. "And you believe your species' adaptability would be sufficient to overcome challenges that defeated more advanced civilizations?" Marcus met Kvalex's compound gaze directly. "I believe that underestimating humans has historically been a mistake that others have regretted." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Kvalex made a gesture that Marcus didn't recognize. His translator labeled it as grudging acknowledgement of determination. "I will include your request in my report," Kvalex said. "The High Council will undoubtedly find it amusing. Do not expect a positive response." As Marcus walked back to his basement office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something irreversible in motion. For better or worse, he'd made himself visible to the Council's leadership. Now he had to hope that when they looked at humanity, they'd see more than just another primitive species to be managed and contained. 3 days later, a message appeared on Marcus's terminal. It was from High Counselor Threnix himself. Report to Launch Bay 7. Immediately. Bring standard emergency provisions for extended deep space deployment. Marcus stared at the message for a full minute before it sank in. Somehow, impossibly, they'd actually included him in the mission. As he packed his emergency gear, the same basic survival kit that had sustained human space travelers for generations, Marcus wondered if he'd just volunteered for the greatest opportunity of his life, or if he'd simply found a more dramatic way to fail than filing waste management reports. Either way, he was about to find out exactly what humans were capable of when the galaxy stopped underestimating them. Launch Bay 7 was a controlled chaos of advanced beings preparing for departure. Marcus had never seen so many different species working together in one space. The ship itself was magnificent, a sleek council vessel called the Harmonious Convergence, designed by the finest Etherian architects and equipped with technology that made Earth's most advanced spacecraft look like stone tools. Marcus approached the loading area with his single emergency pack, feeling thoroughly underdressed compared to the elaborate equipment cases being loaded by other team members. A Syrian energy specialist floated past, her containment suit crackling with data streams. 3 Graviton engineers discussed power requirements in voices that sounded like grinding stone. An Etherian psychic stood motionless at the ship's entrance. Her translucent features focused on something invisible to everyone else. You must be the human. Marcus turned to find himself facing a being he'd never encountered before. Tall and lean with silver skin that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. The alien had 4 arms and eyes that glowed with inner light. Marcus's translator identified the species as Nexari, a rare civilization known for their mastery of quantum mechanics and interdimensional physics. I'm Marcus Chen, he said, offering a respectful nod. You're absolutely right. I'm the human representative. I am Quantum Singer Vex High, the being replied, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in Marcus's bones. I confess curiosity about your inclusion in this mission. Your species' technological development suggests limited usefulness in deep space operations. Marcus had heard variations of this comment dozens of times over the past month, but something in Vex High's tone was different. Where others had been dismissive or condescending, the Nexari seemed genuinely curious, rather than judgmental. My understanding is that the mission involves investigating a communications failure and potential crisis scenario. Marcus replied carefully. Humans have extensive experience with both. Interesting perspective, Vex High said, his silver skin rippling with what Marcus interpreted as thoughtfulness. The Nexari approach to crisis management relies heavily on predictive quantum modeling. We calculate probable outcomes and select optimal responses. How do humans approach unpredictable scenarios? We improvise, Marcus said simply. We assess the situation, identify available resources, and find creative solutions that might not be obvious through traditional analysis. Vex High's 4 arms moved in complex patterns while he processed this information. Improvisation suggests decision-making without complete datasets. The Nexari find such approaches uncomfortable. Before Marcus could respond, a new voice cut across the loading bay. All personnel, prepare for immediate departure. Mission briefing will commence once we achieve hyperspace transit. The voice belonged to Mission Commander Torgan, a massive graviton whose species evolved on a high-gravity world. Standing nearly 3 meters tall and composed of what appeared to be animated granite, Torgan was intimidating even by galactic standards. His appointment to lead the mission was both logical and concerning. Gravitans were known for their methodical approach to problems and their complete intolerance for failure. Marcus followed the other team members aboard the Harmonious Convergence. The ship's interior was even more impressive than its exterior, with corridors that seemed to adjust their configuration based on the needs of different species. The artificial gravity shifted subtly to accommodate the comfort requirements of each passenger, and the lighting adapted to various visual spectrums. His assigned quarters were small but efficiently designed, with basic amenities and a viewing port that showed the docking bay's activity. As Marcus secured his gear, he couldn't help but notice that his room was located in what was clearly the ship's least desirable section near the engine compartment, where the background hum was loudest, and the artificial gravity occasionally fluctuated. The ship departed from the Council station with barely perceptible motion. Marcus felt only the slightest shift as the massive vessel disengaged from its docking clamps and moved into open space. Within minutes, they were accelerating toward the hyperspace entry point that would take them to the Kepler 442 system. The mission briefing took place in the ship's main conference area, a circular room dominated by a holographic display system that could render three-dimensional data with stunning clarity. Marcus took a seat at the back of the room, noting that several team members moved away from him as if his presence might somehow contaminate their effectiveness. Commander Torgan activated the central display, revealing a detailed star map centered on the Kepler 442 system. The research station Advancement of Knowledge has been silent for 14 standard days, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of grinding continents. All automated systems have ceased broadcasting. Long-range sensors detect no signs of structural damage or energy discharge. The display zoomed in to show the research station itself, a sophisticated facility orbiting the system's fourth planet. Marcus studied the design with professional interest. The station was larger than anything Earth had ever constructed in space, with multiple habitat rings and what appeared to be extensive manufacturing capability. Mission parameters are straightforward, Torgan continued. Investigate the cause of communication failure, determine the fate of research personnel, restore station operations if possible. Secure all research data and return to Council space. Dr. Lylan, the Etherian psychic, raised her hand. Her voice carried the musical quality typical of her species. Commander, are we prepared for the possibility that the station was attacked? The Kepler 442 system is beyond Council territory. There are uncontacted species in that region. Contingencies for hostile contact have been incorporated into mission planning, Torgan replied. Detailed tactical assessments will be provided by our security specialist. The security specialist turned out to be a Catherian warrior named Blade Singer Zarthok. The Catherians were reptilian humanoids known throughout the galaxy for their martial prowess and strategic brilliance. Zarthok's scales shifted from deep blue to silver as he stood, a display Marcus's cultural training identified as preparation for combat discussion. Intelligence regarding this system is limited, Zarthok began, his voice carrying sibilant undertones. Long-range surveys identified 3 indigenous species with pre-industrial technology levels. None should have possessed capability to threaten a Council research station. However, absence of distress signals suggests either complete surprise attack or systematic communication disruption. Marcus raised his hand. Commander, have we considered the possibility of internal system failure? Station crews can become isolated from external support during emergencies, leading to cascading failures that might not be immediately obvious to outside observers. The room fell silent. Several team members turned to stare at Marcus with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. Commander Torgan's rocky features showed no emotion, but Marcus sensed disapproval in the way the massive being's attention focused on him. Human Chen, Torgan said slowly. Your suggestion implies that advanced Council technology and trained personnel would be unable to maintain basic operational status during minor emergencies. Such scenarios are prevented by multiple redundant safety systems. With respect, Commander, Marcus continued, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Redundant systems can fail if the triggering event affects their shared vulnerabilities. Human experience suggests that emergencies rarely follow predicted patterns. Dr. Lylan's translucent features showed what Marcus interpreted as thoughtful consideration. The human raises an interesting point. Etherian psychic monitoring of the station ceased abruptly, suggesting either total personnel loss or complete system shutdown. Neither matches patterns from typical hostile encounters. Blade Singer Zarthok's scales shifted to a deeper blue. Psychic silence could indicate specialized jamming technology or neural disruption weapons. Both suggest sophisticated attackers. Or, Marcus said quietly, it could indicate something simpler. Power failure, environmental systems malfunction, or crew evacuation to planetary surface. The Syrian energy specialist, whose designation was Flux Current Meridose, spoke through her containment suit speakers. Human perspective assumes technological limitations that Council engineering has eliminated. Advanced stations do not experience power failure or environmental systems malfunction. Marcus felt the familiar frustration that came with being dismissed for his species' perceived primitiveness. Advanced engineering doesn't eliminate all failure modes, he said, working to keep his voice level. It creates new ones that might not be immediately obvious to people who assume the technology is infallible. Commander Torgon made a sound like boulders grinding together, which Marcus's translator identified as graviton displeasure. Human Chen, your role in this mission is observer and cultural consultant. Engineering assessments will be handled by qualified personnel. The rebuke stung, but Marcus nodded acceptance. He'd made his point. Whether anyone would consider it remained to be seen. The rest of the briefing focused on technical details that highlighted just how outclassed Marcus was by his teammates. Quantum Singer Vex High presented interdimensional scanning protocols that could analyze space-time distortions with precision measured in attoseconds. Dr. Lylan outlined psychic detection methods that could locate conscious beings across stellar distances. Flux Current Murdos described energy analysis techniques that could reconstruct events by examining residual electromagnetic signatures. By comparison, Marcus's contribution to the mission was essentially limited to taking notes and making observations that his more advanced colleagues had probably already considered and dismissed. As the briefing concluded and team members dispersed to their duties, Marcus remained in the conference room, studying the holographic display of the Kepler 442 system. Something about the situation felt familiar, though he couldn't quite identify why. Contemplating the ineffectiveness of human analytical methods, Marcus turned to find Vex High approaching, the Nixari's silver skin rippling with complex patterns. Actually, I was thinking about something my grandfather used to say. He was a mechanic, worked on aircraft engines. He always said that the most dangerous assumptions were the ones that seemed most obvious. Explain this concept, Vex High requested. His forearms moving in what Marcus had learned was a Nexary gesture of genuine interest. When an aircraft engine fails, the obvious explanation is usually mechanical malfunction. But my grandfather said the most experienced mechanics learned to look for simple problems. First, contaminated fuel, blocked air intakes, incorrectly installed components. The complex systems could hide simple failures. Vex High's skin patterns shifted to deeper silver tones. You suggest that advanced analysis might overlook basic causation. I suggest that every species tends to see problems through the filter of their own technological sophistication, Marcus replied. Maybe that means we miss solutions that require different kinds of thinking. Interesting hypothesis, Vex High said after a moment. The Nexary will observe your analytical methods with curiosity. 3 days into their journey toward Kepler 442, the ship's routine was disrupted by an unexpected discovery. Marcus was in the observation lounge, studying star charts and trying to understand the tactical implications of their destination, when emergency alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Commander Torgon's voice echoed through the communication system. All personnel to emergency stations. We have detected an unidentified vessel in our approach vector. Marcus hurried toward the bridge, following streams of crew members moving with practiced efficiency. The ship's combat systems were activating automatically. Defensive shields strengthening, weapons systems coming online, scanning arrays focusing on the potential threat. The bridge was a masterpiece of advanced technology, with command stations arranged in a complex three-dimensional configuration that allowed different species to work together despite their varying physical requirements. Marcus found a position where he could observe without interfering with the organized activity around him. The main display showed their target, a vessel unlike anything in Marcus's knowledge of galactic ship designs. It was massive, perhaps twice the size of their own ship, but its configuration was strange. Where Council vessels emphasized elegant curves and efficient materials, this ship appeared to be constructed from salvaged components welded together with little regard for aesthetic considerations. Analysis. Quantum Singer Vex High, Commander Torgan ordered. Vex High's forearms danced across his control interface, calling up readings that made Marcus's eyes water with their complexity. Vessel configuration, unknown. Energy signature suggests fusion-based propulsion with chemical rocket backup systems. Hull composition appears to be multiple different alloy types, inconsistent with unified construction methodology. Dr. Lylan, her hands pressed against psychic interface panels, added her assessment. I detect multiple conscious beings aboard the vessel. Thought patterns are chaotic, aggressive. They appear to be aware of our presence. Blade Singer Zarthok's scales had shifted to combat red. Commander, recommend we maintain maximum safe distance. Unknown vessel capabilities require cautious approach. Marcus studied the display, noting details that his teammates might have missed. The ship's construction pattern, the way different sections seem to have been added over time, the mix of advanced and primitive technologies. Commander, Marcus said, stepping forward despite the breach in protocol. I think that ship might be built by the research station personnel. Every being on the bridge turned to stare at him. Commander Torgan's expression could have cracked granite. Explain immediately. The construction pattern suggests rapid assembly using whatever materials were available. The energy signatures match the kind of improvised propulsion system that emergency crews might build if they needed to evacuate quickly but didn't have access to proper shipbuilding facilities. Flux Current Murdos's containment suit crackled with skeptical energy discharges. Human logic suggests Council personnel would construct primitive vessels using inferior methodology. This assumption lacks credibility. Unless, Marcus continued, his mind racing through possibilities, they didn't have a choice. If something happened to the research station that forced immediate evacuation, they might have had to build whatever they could with available resources. Dr. Lyland's psychic readings suddenly intensified. Commander, I'm detecting structured thought patterns from the unknown vessel. They appear to be attempting communication, using primitive electromagnetic broadcasts. The bridge's communication system crackled to life with a transmission that made Marcus's heart race. The voice was speaking standard galactic, but with an accent that suggested desperation and exhaustion. Unknown council vessel, this is Dr. Kethvar of the Research Station Advancement of Knowledge. Please respond immediately. We have critical information regarding hostile contact. Our situation is desperate. Commander Torgan looked around his bridge, clearly weighing options. Making contact with an unknown vessel was dangerous, but ignoring a potential distress call from council personnel was unthinkable. Open communication channel, he ordered finally. As the transmission connected, Marcus realized that his simple suggestion about improvisation and emergency construction might have just proven more valuable than all the advanced analysis systems on the ship combined. Sometimes, the most sophisticated solution was recognizing when sophistication wasn't the answer. The real test would be what they found when they reached the Kepler 442 system itself. Dr. Kethvar's face appeared on the main screen, and Marcus immediately understood why the psychic readings had seemed chaotic. The Zephyrite researcher's compound eyes were dulled with exhaustion, his mandibles clicking in distress patterns that Marcus recognized from his cultural training. Behind him, the makeshift ship's bridge showed clear signs of jury-rigged systems and emergency repairs. Commander Torgan, Dr. Kethvar said, relief evident even through his alien features. We thought we would never see another council vessel. The situation in the Kepler 442 system has become unprecedented. Dr. Kethvar, report your status immediately. Commander Torgan ordered, his granite voice carrying authority that seemed to steady the exhausted researcher. The research station is lost, Doctor, Kethvar replied grimly. 17 days ago, we detected unusual energy readings from the planet's surface. Our initial assessment suggested geological activity, seismic events that might affect our orbital research. We were wrong. The screen split to show additional survivors crowded around Dr. Kethvar. Marcus counted at least a dozen beings from various species, all showing signs of stress and exhaustion. Their makeshift vessel had clearly been constructed under desperate circumstances. The indigenous species we had catalogued as pre-industrial possessed capabilities we failed to recognize. Dr. Kethvar continued. Their technology operates on principles that our sensors couldn't properly detect. They launched what can only be described as a coordinated assault on the station. Blade Singer Zarthok's scales shifted to combat alertness. Describe their weapons and tactical capabilities. That's the problem, Dr. Kethvar said, his mandibles clicking rapidly. We still don't understand their technology. They somehow disrupted our power systems, disabled our communications, and infiltrated the station without triggering any of our security protocols. By the time we realized we were under attack, it was too late to mount any effective defense. Quantum Singer Vexhai leaned forward, his silver skin rippling with concentration. Dr. Kethvar, quantum analysis of your vessel suggests construction using station materials and emergency fabrication techniques. How did you manage to escape? We didn't escape, Dr. Kethvar said grimly. We were allowed to leave. The attackers seemed more interested in capturing the station intact than in eliminating personnel. They herded us toward the evacuation areas and seemed to be studying our responses. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Dr. Kethvar, are you saying they were treating you as experimental subjects? Every being on the bridge turned to stare at Marcus again. But this time the atmosphere was different. His question had apparently struck at something the others had missed. Yes, Dr. Kethvar said slowly, focusing on Marcus through the screen. That's exactly what it felt like. They seemed to be observing our behavior patterns, our technological responses, our social interactions during crisis situations. Dr. Lyland's psychic readings intensified dramatically. Commander, I'm detecting something disturbing in Dr. Kethvar's thought patterns. There are gaps, periods of time that seem to be missing from his memories. Impossible, Flux Current Murdos declared, her containment suit crackling with skeptical energy. Council personnel undergo neural conditioning that prevents memory modification by external sources. Marcus stepped forward, an uncomfortable suspicion forming in his mind. Dr. Kethvar, during your time in captivity, did you experience any periods of unconsciousness? Any gaps in your awareness that you couldn't account for? The research team leader's mandibles stopped clicking entirely, a sign of extreme distress in Zephyrite's. How did you know? There were intervals where we seemed to lose time. Hours would pass without any memory of what occurred. Commander, Marcus said urgently, turning to face Torgan. I recommend we don't allow that vessel to dock with our ship. If these survivors have been subjected to unknown technology that can modify memories and implant behavioral patterns, they could pose a security risk. The bridge erupted in multiple conversations as different species processed this possibility. Commander Torgan raised one massive hand for silence. Human Chen, your suggestion implies that these personnel have been compromised. What evidence supports this assessment? Marcus chose his words carefully, aware that his credibility with the team remained fragile. The pattern, Dr. Kethvar describes capture, study, and controlled release matches behavior that human intelligence agencies would recognize as psychological warfare. If an unknown species wanted to gather information about Council capabilities, allowing survivors to return with implanted surveillance technology would be an effective strategy. Vexhai's forearms moved in rapid calculation patterns. Quantum analysis supports potential for memory modification technology. Nixari science has theoretical frameworks for consciousness manipulation, though practical application remains beyond our current capabilities. But that would mean the entire rescue scenario is a deception, Dr. Lyland said, her translucent features showing horror at the implications. These beings we're speaking with might not even be aware they're compromised. Bladesinger Zarthok's scales had shifted to deep combat red. Commander, if the human's assessment is correct, we face a hostile species with sophisticated intelligence capabilities and unknown technological advantages. Recommend immediate retreat to Council space. Commander Torgan stared at the screen where Dr. Kethvar waited for their response, unaware of the conversation taking place about him. The implications of Marcus's suggestion were staggering. If the survivors were unknowingly carrying surveillance technology or behavioral modification, bringing them aboard would compromise the entire mission. Dr. Kethvar, Commander Torgan said finally, we're implementing quarantine protocols for your protection. Maintain current distance while we establish secure communication channels and medical assessment procedures. Even through the screen, Marcus could see Dr. Kethvar's confusion and growing distress. Commander, our life support systems are failing. This vessel was constructed for emergency evacuation. not extended operation. We need immediate assistance, or the transmission cut off abruptly. On the tactical display, the makeshift vessel showed signs of power fluctuation and system failure. "Commander, Doctor," Lyland said urgently, "I'm losing psychic contact with the survivors. Their thought patterns are fading rapidly." Marcus watched the display with growing dread. If his suspicions were wrong, they were watching Council personnel die, because he'd convinced the team to maintain distance. If he was right, the failing life support systems might be another layer of the deception, designed to force rescue actions that would compromise their ship. "Commander," he said quietly, "there's a way to test whether the survivors are compromised without endangering our mission." "Explain immediately," Torgon ordered. "We use a shuttle with minimal crew to conduct the rescue. If the survivors are carrying surveillance technology or behavioral modification, the shuttle can be quarantined or abandoned if necessary. We save lives without risking the entire ship." Quantum Singer Vexhi's skin patterns shifted to deep calculation mode. Human logic presents acceptable risk parameters. Shuttle crew could maintain communication protocols to detect evidence of compromise. "I volunteer to pilot the rescue shuttle," Marcus said, knowing as he spoke that he was volunteering for what might be a suicide mission. The bridge fell silent. Several team members stared at Marcus with expressions he couldn't quite interpret. "Human Chen," Commander Torgan said slowly, "your species lacks experience with advanced shuttle operations. Such missions require—" "Commander, my species has extensive experience with emergency rescue operations in hostile environments," Marcus interrupted. "And if these survivors are compromised, having a human conduct, the rescue might provide advantages that more advanced approaches would miss." Blade Singer Zarthok's scales showed thoughtful consideration. "Explain these potential advantages." Marcus took a deep breath, knowing he was about to stake his reputation on human capabilities that the galactic community didn't respect. If this is a deception designed to compromise Council technology, the attackers probably planned countermeasures for advanced scanning systems and sophisticated detection methods. They might not have considered simpler approaches. "You're suggesting that primitive human techniques might succeed where advanced Council methods would fail?" Flux Current Murdos asked, her containment suit crackling with what might have been amusement. "I'm suggesting that if you're playing a game against someone who thinks you're stupid, sometimes the best strategy is to be exactly as smart as they think you are," Marcus replied. Vexhi's forearms moved in complex patterns that Marcus's translator identified as expressions of genuine intrigue. Fascinating tactical philosophy. The Nexari find merit in unconventional approaches to problem-solving. Commander Torgan considered for long moments, his granite features revealing nothing. Finally, he nodded. "Human Chen, you will conduct rescue operations using Shuttle Bay 2. Quantum Singer Vexhi will provide technical support. Blade Singer Zarthok will monitor tactical situation. Dr. Lylan will maintain psychic surveillance of all personnel involved." As Marcus headed toward the shuttle bay, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror, he realized that for the first time since arriving at the Council station, he was being given responsibility that matched his training and capabilities. The fact that it might be a suicide mission was secondary to the chance to prove that human approaches to problem-solving had value in the galactic community. The shuttle itself was a masterpiece of Council engineering, equipped with technology that surpassed anything Earth had ever produced. But as Marcus ran through the pre-flight checklist, he found himself thinking about his grandfather's advice regarding simple problems hidden by complex systems. If the survivors were compromised, the attackers would expect sophisticated scanning attempts and advanced countermeasures. They might not expect a human to simply look for obvious inconsistencies that sophisticated technology might miss. "Shuttle prepared for launch," Marcus reported over the communication channel. "Beginning approach to target vessel. Human Chen." Vexhi's voice came through the speakers. "Nexari sensors detect no obvious surveillance technology aboard the target vessel. Either their concealment methods exceed our detection capabilities, or your suspicions may be incorrect." "Understood," Marcus replied, guiding the shuttle toward the failing vessel. Initiating visual inspection protocols. As he drew closer to Dr. Kethvar's makeshift ship, Marcus realized that his human instincts were already detecting patterns that the advanced sensors had missed. The vessel's construction was indeed improvised, but certain elements were too sophisticated for emergency fabrication. The hull plating showed wear patterns that didn't match recent construction. Most telling, the ship's configuration suggested it had been designed for this specific deception, rather than built from whatever materials happened to be available. "Commander," Marcus said quietly, "I think we have a problem." The real test would come when he attempted to board the vessel. If his suspicions were correct, the next few minutes would determine whether humanity's first major contribution to a council mission would be exposing an elaborate enemy intelligence operation, or getting himself killed by overestimating human intuition in the face of alien technology. Either way, Marcus was about to discover exactly how much the galaxy had underestimated human capabilities, and whether that would be enough to save everyone involved. Marcus guided the shuttle closer to the mysterious vessel, his human instincts screaming warnings that the advanced sensors couldn't detect. The ship's hull showed the kind of weathering and modifications that came from years of use, not days of emergency construction. More concerning, the damage patterns looked deliberately created rather than naturally occurring. "Shuttle to harmonious convergence," Marcus reported quietly. "Visual inspection reveals inconsistencies with reported construction timeline. This vessel shows evidence of long-term operation, not recent emergency assembly." Commander Torgan's voice crackled through the communication system. "Explain your assessment, Human Chen." Marcus maneuvered the shuttle to examine different sections of the vessel, comparing what he saw with his understanding of emergency engineering. "Commander, the hull modifications show tool marks consistent with precision fabrication, not desperate improvisation. The wear patterns on external components suggest months or years of operation. Most importantly, the structural reinforcements are exactly what you'd need if you were planning to carry passengers long-term, not evacuate them quickly. Your conclusions based on visual inspection contradict advanced sensor analysis." Flux Current Murdos's voice carried skeptical energy discharges. "Council technology would have detected sophisticated construction methods." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus replied, a terrible understanding beginning to form. "What if this isn't council technology at all? What if we're looking at a reproduction built by someone who studied captured council vessels?" The communication channel fell silent. Marcus could imagine the implications sinking in aboard the main ship. If an unknown species had captured and analyzed council technology well enough to build convincing reproductions, their intelligence capabilities far exceeded anything in the galaxy's current threat assessments. Dr. Lyland's psychic voice came through with unusual strain. "Marcus, I'm detecting something disturbing. The thought patterns from the vessel are wrong. They feel like council personnel, but there are underlying structures that don't match any species in our databases." Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. "Dr. Lyland, are you saying these aren't actually the people they claim to be?" "I'm saying they might be people who have been modified," she replied, her musical voice carrying horrified uncertainty. "Their memories, their personalities, even their species-specific thought patterns seem authentic. But there's something else beneath it all, something that doesn't belong." Blade Singer Zarthok's tactical assessment cut through the growing tension. If these beings have been compromised at a fundamental level, boarding their vessel could expose our personnel to whatever modification process was used. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Marcus stared at the vessel floating before him, knowing that real council personnel might be trapped inside, possibly unaware that they'd been altered by unknown technology. The ethical implications were staggering. Abandon them and condemn them to death, or attempt rescue and risk spreading the contamination to his own ship. "Commander," Marcus said slowly, "there might be a third option. What if we board the vessel but maintain complete isolation protocols, use environmental suits, avoid direct contact, extract intelligence about what happened without exposing ourselves to whatever modification process was used?" "Human Chen, such an operation would be extremely dangerous," Commander Torgan replied. "If these beings have been compromised, their responses to contact attempts are unpredictable." "That's why it should be me," Marcus said, suiting up in the shuttle's emergency gear. If something goes wrong, you lose one human, instead of risking more valuable personnel. And human psychology might be resistant to whatever modification process they're using, simply because we're not included in their database of known species. Vex-High's voice carried what Marcus had learned to recognize as Nexari concern. Your reasoning assumes that primitive human mental structures would be more difficult to modify than advanced council species. This assumption may be incorrect. Or it might be exactly right, Marcus replied, checking his suit's life support systems. Sometimes being underestimated is the biggest advantage you can have. As Marcus prepared to transfer to the mysterious vessel, he realized that his entire experience with the Galactic Council had led to this moment. Every dismissive comment, every assignment to menial tasks, every assumption about human inadequacy had prepared him for a situation where being seen as primitive might actually provide protection. Beginning docking procedures, Marcus announced, guiding the shuttle toward the vessel's airlock system, maintaining full environmental isolation, and recording all interactions for analysis. The airlock cycled with mechanical precision that felt wrong for an improvised vessel. As Marcus entered the ship's corridor, his human senses immediately detected something that the advanced sensors had missed. The smell was wrong. Every species had a distinctive scent signature, and while his translator could identify the visual and auditory characteristics of the beings aboard, their scent patterns didn't match. "Shuttle to main ship," Marcus whispered into his suit communicator. "Environmental analysis suggests these beings may not be the species they appear to be. Recommend extreme caution." Dr. Kethvar appeared at the end of the corridor, moving toward Marcus with obvious relief. But now that he was seeing the Zephyrite researcher in person, Marcus noticed details that hadn't been visible through the screen transmission. The way he moved was slightly wrong. Zephyrites had a distinctive scuttling gait that Dr. Kethvar wasn't quite managing. His mandible movements were close to correct, but missing the subtle variations that indicated emotional state. "Human Chen," Dr. Kethvar said, "thank the Council you've come. We need immediate evacuation to your ship." "Dr. Kethvar," Marcus replied carefully, "I need to conduct a brief medical assessment before we can proceed with evacuation. Standard quarantine protocols for potential exposure to unknown pathogens." The being that looked like Dr. Kethvar paused for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Marcus to confirm his suspicions. A real Zephyrite would have immediately protested such delays when facing life support failure. They would have demanded to know why evacuation wasn't proceeding immediately. "Of course," the false Dr. Kethvar said finally. "Medical assessment is prudent." Marcus activated his suit's recording systems and began a careful examination of the vessel's interior, noting details that might reveal its true origins. The construction was sophisticated, but there were subtle inconsistencies that suggested fabrication by beings who had studied Council technology without fully understanding its underlying principles. More disturbing were the other survivors. As Marcus encountered them throughout the ship, each one seemed to be a nearly perfect reproduction of their claimed species, but with tiny flaws that only someone with extensive xenobiological training might notice. A Syrian whose energy patterns flickered in ways that real energy beings never did. A gravitan whose rock-like hide showed crystal formations that didn't match their claimed homeworld's geological conditions. "Shuttle to harmonious convergence," Marcus whispered urgently. "These are not Council personnel. They're reproductions. Extremely sophisticated, but definitely artificial." Commander Torgon's response was immediate. "Human Chen, withdraw immediately. Do not attempt evacuation." But as Marcus turned to leave, the false Dr. Kethvar and several other survivors moved to block his path. Their behavior shifted from grateful relief to something that made Marcus's human instincts scream danger. "I'm afraid we cannot allow you to depart with this information," the being said, and now its voice carried harmonics that no Zephyrite throat could produce. "Your species' psychological resistance to our modification protocols was unexpected. This presents a problem that requires adjustment." Marcus found himself facing what might be the galaxy's first encounter with a hostile species, sophisticated enough to create perfect biological reproductions of Council personnel. And he was alone, cut off from his ship, with technology that these beings had clearly studied extensively. But as the false survivors began to close in on him, Marcus realized that being underestimated one more time might be exactly the advantage he needed. "You're right," Marcus said, backing toward what appeared to be a maintenance access panel. "Human psychology is resistant to modification. You know why?" The artificial beings paused, apparently curious despite their hostile intentions. "Because we're paranoid, suspicious, and we assume everyone is trying to kill us," Marcus continued, his hands finding the panel controls behind his back. "Which means we always have backup plans." Marcus triggered his suit's emergency beacon and simultaneously overloaded the maintenance access controls, causing a cascade failure in the vessel's environmental systems. As artificial gravity fluctuated and emergency lighting activated, he activated the deadman switch that would transmit all his recorded data to the main ship regardless of what happened to him. The false survivors moved toward him with inhuman coordination, but Marcus was already diving toward the airlock, using his suit's emergency thruster pack to propel himself back toward his shuttle. Behind him, the mysterious vessel began to show its true capabilities as advanced weapon systems emerged from concealed hull positions. "Harmonious convergence. This is Marcus," he gasped into his communicator as defensive fire erupted around his shuttle. "Unknown hostiles with advanced technology and biological reproduction capabilities. They've been studying us. Full tactical response authorized." As his shuttle raced back toward the main ship with enemy fire pursuing, Marcus realized that he'd just provided the Galactic Council with intelligence that could reshape their understanding of potential threats. An unknown species that could create perfect biological duplicates of Council members represented a danger that exceeded any previous threat assessment. But more importantly, he'd proven that human instincts and human suspicion had value in a galaxy that had dismissed his species as primitive. The very traits that made other species consider humans paranoid and violent had allowed him to detect a deception that advanced technology couldn't recognize. Commander Torgan's voice crackled through the communication system as the Harmonious Convergence's weapon systems engaged the enemy vessel. "Human Chen, your assessment saved this mission, and potentially the entire Council. How did you detect what our advanced systems missed?" "Commander," Marcus replied, as his shuttle reached the safety of the main ship's docking bay. "My species has a saying. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. Sometimes the most primitive instincts are the most reliable." In part, as the enemy vessel was destroyed by Council weapons, Marcus realized that the galaxy's perception of humanity was about to change dramatically. The species that had been assigned to waste management and inventory control had just uncovered a threat that could have infiltrated the highest levels of galactic government. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same assignment office where he'd first been told his role would be monitoring garbage disposal. But now, instead of wearing janitorial coveralls, he wore the insignia of a senior intelligence analyst, the youngest being ever promoted to such a position in Council history. The Syrian clerk who had originally processed his assignment looked up from her data screens with what Marcus had learned to recognize as respect. "Agent Chen, your new assignment parameters have been approved. You'll be leading the Counterintelligence Division's new Human Integration Program." "Thank you," Marcus replied, then paused. "Can I ask you something? When I first arrived, why were all humans assigned to menial positions? Was it really about probationary periods for primitive species?" The energy being's harmonious tones carried what might have been embarrassment. "Agent Chen, the truth is that we didn't know how to evaluate your species' capabilities. Your technological development suggested limitations, but your psychological profiles were unprecedented. The Council leadership decided that observation of human behavior in controlled situations would provide better assessment data than theoretical analysis." Marcus smiled. "So we were test subjects. You were unknown variables," the clerk corrected. "And unknown variables make the Council nervous. But your performance in the Kepler 442 crisis has demonstrated that human instincts and human suspicion provide security advantages that more advanced species lack." As Marcus left the assignment office to begin his new role, training other humans for intelligence positions throughout the galaxy, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from waste management to one of the most sensitive positions in Council space. The galaxy had underestimated humanity because they assumed technological sophistication was the only measure of useful capability. They'd missed the value of paranoia, suspicion, improvisation, and the willingness to assume that the worst-case scenario was probably correct. But Marcus had learned something equally important. Being underestimated was only an advantage if you used it to prove your actual capabilities. The real test wasn't convincing the galaxy that humans were primitive, it was demonstrating that primitive instincts, combined with advanced training, could achieve results that pure technological advancement couldn't match. As he walked through the corridors of the Council Station, no longer relegated to the service levels, Marcus smiled at the irony. Humanity's greatest strength in the galactic community wasn't their technology or their diplomacy. It was their absolute certainty that somewhere, somehow, someone was probably trying to kill them. In a galaxy full of advanced civilizations that had forgotten how to be suspicious, that might be the most valuable trait of all.